Okay, so we have a very disorderly group tonight, but let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. And as we do with every meeting, we'll start with a prayer and pledge. So please rise. Heavenly Father, as we gather today for the Planning Commission meeting, we humbly ask for your guidance and wisdom in our deliberation. Grant us discernment to see the needs of the community clearly and the foresight to make decisions that promote responsible development while honoring the character of our county. May our discussions be respectful, thoughtful, and focused on the greater good. Help us to listen attentively to all perspectives, weigh options with fairness, and ultimately choose what is best for the future of our community. We thank you for your presence with us and ask that you bless our work here today. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can we get a roll call?
Roll call. Dee Dee Schott Grace. Dee Dee Schott Grace. Absent. John Gresham. John Gresham. Absent. Nicole Hunt.
Here.
Kyle Gennardo.
Here.
Dan McAllen. Diana Edstrom.
Here.
Ken Madsen.
Here.
Kevin Kirkwood.
Present.
Robert Politek. Robert Politek. Absent. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any updates and staff report?
Good afternoon, Commissioner, or all the commissioners. Do you want to have a update from your Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee members?
Yeah, we can do that, but there's nothing from staff, no updates from previous meetings.
I can give you a couple updates as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
The Chevelle rezone and preliminary plat were approved by the BOCC as well as the Roselle rezone. The BOCC also approved a right-of-way vacation and Independence Filing 5 final plat. The Coyote Ridge PUD will be heard before the BOCC on October 8th, following new notice for that hearing. And the Prairie Rock Ranch rezone, which was heard by this commission, was withdrawn.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, you want to talk a little bit about the steering committee meeting?
Sure, happy to give my perspective. We had our third meeting this past Thursday, and it was an in-person meeting here in this room. I thought it was good turnout. The biggest thing we did was we reviewed 3 different vision statements that Kimley Horn, the firm that the county hired, had drafted, and they did this based on feedback primarily that was received from our group, but also at a couple of other small events. And so they touched on 3 different areas. One was more kind of community-based, another was about growth with restrictions, and then another one had more of a kind of an economic type of growth aspect. But I would say that all 3 were still found lacking. Nobody agreed. I think it was a 4-3-3-4 split, and the last 4 was, I don't like any of them, so I'm not going to vote for any. and that actually ended up being me. I was one of the 4 that did not vote on any. But I think what they did glean, we had a conversation about kind of where we all felt some of those statements were lacking. And so Kimley Horn, and then some of us have actually written vision statements. I showed up with one that I had written that spoke a lot more to, the vision of a statement that respects responsible growth, that restricts growth that the county's not ready for, that it has to be paced with what the county can actually keep up with. Kevin also had written one that I think a lot of people liked. So I think there was good feedback, and I think that Kimley Horn they're going back to the drawing board. They're going to come back with another version, I think only one this time. But I did clarify because I was concerned that we were having these conversations and potentially creating a closer to what we want vision statement without having any open houses yet and without seeing the survey results, which don't close until September the 5th, this Friday. And so I raised that to Kimley Horn, and what they said was that they're hoping to get something that's like 80% of the way there that they can take to the open houses, that they can then compare to the survey results, and that they can, finesse it the rest of the way. So at least that's how I heard it. But I really did want to convey to them that I don't think we should be moving forward with a vision statement without actually getting community input, because we're only 16 people in a room here telling you what our opinions are. But if we actually want to get the opinions of the people of this county, we need to make sure that we're waiting to get that feedback from the survey and in person. So I felt hopeful at the end of the meeting. I did feel hopeful that they are going to make sure that they get feedback from the community. And I do think it actually would be a good idea to have a draft vision statement that people can look at and then give either positive or negative feedback on. So I'm hopeful anyway that our next meeting will have something closer to what all of us can agree is how we'd like to move forward. I think that's about it for my summary. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add,
Yeah.
Chair.
I'd add that of the three that they presented, it felt like they didn't listen in the first rounds of the discussion. They asked us all to present a case or a vision statement. Several of us did in that second meeting, and they kind of evaporated, and the thoughts behind it were not there, right? So I think they're trying to steer in a direction that maybe the county's not ready for yet, but all of those vision statements that they presented, I could not get behind either. And it was, it lacked any kind of tangle factor, for want of a better way to describe it. There was nothing there that said, wow, I want to live in this community. This represents me, and that wasn't there. And then you get into the principles that support the ones that they were professing, and they supported with the principles what they were trying to achieve, but again, would not have reflected what I think the community would stand for and go for. And so I'm very much looking forward to hopefully they listen to us in this next meeting, and that one vision statement that's going to get us 80% of the way there is more reflective of what this community stands for. Who is they? They is in Kimley Horn.
Kimley Horn,
Yes.
the firm. And I would add too.
I would like. I would like to say that they're trying to facilitate, but they definitely have boxes that they want to fit everything into, and so they're trying to move into those boxes. And I don't think we're not built for those boxes. This is an urban community. It's a rural community. It's built on faith and hard work and the foundation of farming, and we don't need to just nod to that. The question becomes, are we a bedroom community for Aurora, Castle Rock, Denver? And I think that's kind of where they want us to go. And I think there's an opportunity for business growth. We do need to do some foundational work for infrastructure, but that should be stage one, and that should be part of the overarching plan. I keep bringing up the architectural plan for this, and giving you full credit, by the way, because I think it's a great idea, and yet it doesn't seem to be resonating with Kimley Horn and some of the development in the community, some of the developers in the community.
What is it, an architectural plan? So an architectural plan would require developers in commercial residential to follow a specific plan that falls within the guidelines of our community. Which makes sense that it doesn't maybe want to resonate with developers.
Yeah, I do understand. it
Pardon me,
does.
commissioners.
Put
If
them
you
in
could
boxes.
remember, we have a new microphone system. You'll have to turn it on when you speak. Thank you.
We're busted again, so.
I think too, you remember Kimley Horn came before us just before they started. And one of the questions I asked them too is, we're a different type of community. We're not like your average county. So how are you going to make sure that you're tailoring what you're doing for our unique rural county that doesn't have an offshoot of E470 or I-25? We're different, and we're going to be different, and we want to be different. And I thought when Greg Lopez, he came in and spoke with the commissioners, the BOCC, I think earlier this spring, and he talked about how if you looked at our current vision statement, there's nothing like super unique that yells, oh, this is Elbert County. Like it could be a vision statement that applies to Parker or to Littleton. Like there's nothing unique about it. And so I was a little bit underwhelmed because in my opinion, there was nothing super unique about what was offered. And the other thing that they're balancing is that this vision statement is supposed to be broad enough that it can break down to like objectives and then break down to specific goals. But my concern is that if you get too broad and too vague, then it becomes whoever the interpreter of the language is. And so that's where my concern is about trying to find the right balance. It's got to be unique to our county, but it also needs to be a clear principle that doesn't go both ways.
Sure.
So I've watched all of the steering committee meetings, and I think both of you hit on the point that, and the question are who's steering who. So what I'm hearing at least is I'm hearing a lot of urban development words, smart growth, which has 10 very specific parameters if you go and you look this up. And from everything I've read about smart growth, it is more geared to centering your community in an area that has your businesses, your shops, everything is walkable. It's a different dynamic than, as you said, that we have in this county. And I'm also hearing the buzzwords of preparing for climate change, equity, inclusion, things that to me are more driven by a different set of values maybe than what I think of as conservative or in this county. And I think at the last meeting, one of the, what went after the vision plan? Was it principles or?
Principles, yes.
I think they put in there, the number one was connecting, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but connecting the entire county through roads and transportation. And again, like you said, maybe they're getting ahead of themselves or they have a different drive. And again, I think it's more of an urban planning background that they're going with.
A city growth as
Yeah.
opposed to a county growth.
Ken,
do you have any thoughts as well, since you sit on that?
Yeah, I actually agree strongly with both of your comments there. I thought all the vision statements were lacking. They weren't consistent with what we want as a county and what I've heard our county residents, what they want. From my perspective, the vision statement should be is aspirational. It's not something that talks about, the minutia. The minutia comes later on. So, I went and looked at a pile of different vision statements, and not one I saw growth. Even look at Boulder. It doesn't talk about growth. Parker doesn't talk about growth. Why do we have to talk about growth? That should be something that comes in the rules and regs, from my perspective. What's important to me is keeping the integrity of the community, being able to pass it on down generations, and have some big aspirational statement, and then go into the core principles where you really start defining what does this mean.
Fantastic, thanks, Ken. Jen, you get to play in this space as well. It's probably not fair to ask you to weigh in, just because you're somewhat in the steering top of that committee. So I would remind us all in the Planning Commission that this does come back to us for approval. And so what we see, what we hear, how we hear it, how we believe feeds into this. And we should listen to our county constituents, the folks that make up this county and plan for this county based on who they are, as opposed to what a developer may want or what a real estate agent may be pushing for, or I would listen to what the farmer has to say, right? So, and there's a good mix of folks. Still kind of confused why there's 16 members as opposed to 15 members, but as we play in this space, I'm sure that will get answered.
And if I could just add one last thing about what you were just mentioning about the document, is that, Jennifer, it's my understanding that under state law, it is like the duty and the responsibility of the Planning Commission to establish this document and to vote for approval of the document based on the approval of the BOCC. But ultimately, when the steering committee finishes the work that they're doing and it's brought to this committee, there's going to be several rounds of review, and that ultimately, like, a lot of that responsibility lands into the laps of those who are sitting here on the Planning Commission. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. Actually, we probably have more of a say even than the Board of County Commissioners does, based on how we're structured. Okay, with that being said, we have a citizen in the room. We're opening the floor to citizens' comments if you're interested. If you're not, then we will jump in, and I don't believe there's any meeting minutes for this. I'm not going to explain the public hearing process since we've got a public of one. I'm sure that you understand. And so we'll jump right to the public hearing relating to Crescent Filing 1 and Crescent Filing 2, both of which need to be continued to September 16th.
Microphone, please.
Yes, ma'am. That being said, I hear a motion to continue Crescent Filing 1, Crescent Filing 2 to September 16th.
I move that we continue Crescent Filing 1 and 2 to September 16th.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? I think the ayes have it, so thank you. With that, public hearing is closed, and we move on to the working group section. And Jen, you've got a bit of a development review process overview scheduled for us today.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We did have to meet tonight because those were noticed items, and so we thought it might be a good opportunity to provide a little bit of sort of basic overview and training that has been requested. I will start off by saying that this is very, you can't even see it. You guys have to tell me this. There we go. Look, we had the date. Okay. So I do have a bit of a overview or summary session provided for you all with some opportunities for us to chat through any questions that come up and some discussion at the end about future speakers and training sessions. So what I had wanted to say was that this is intended to be extremely general in nature, so it's not really getting into specific regulation language or anything like that. It's really more intended to be conversational and at a very basic level. And so if some of you are bored, I do apologize in advance, but I thought it was important to start very basic, and then we can certainly build up from there. And for any members of the public that may be watching as well, you know, things like zoning aren't, right? You don't talk about it at parties. So it's not necessarily common knowledge, right? Sort of what you all do, what the regulations say, and what they even mean. And so, again, this is just very general for discussion, but I think it could be helpful to provide an overview of the process and sort of what goes into things and what we're trying to achieve. So if you'll bear with me through that. I did want to start with a little bit of context because I think it's interesting and helpful, so hopefully you all do as well. Sometimes there's a forest and trees situation, right, where we're here and we can sometimes even forget our context. And so I wanted to start with that and then we'll build on that. So here is our lovely state with all 64 counties outlined, and you can see the major interstates running through Colorado. And here we are with Elbert County. We do have I-70 running through the corner of the county. A little bit interesting, right? The Elbert County is surrounded by 4 very different counties from us. We have Arapahoe County to the north with over 650,000 residents approximately. Douglas County to our west, almost 400,000 residents. El Paso County to the south, right, with over 700,000. And then Lincoln County to our east with 5,500. So we're right there in the middle, between 28 and 29,000 residents. So just a little bit of context, right? It does help sometimes for us to remember why there's so much happening here, why there's so much moving this way. There is a lot going on in this general area. The county as a whole, I love this map. I find it fascinating, right? This is our zoning map. So the whole county, we have a huge county by land area, right? Over 1,800 square miles. From a zoning perspective, 95% of the county is zoned ag. So I just wanted to highlight that. I know we show this at our meetings and it can be a little bit hard to see, right? Included in Elbert County are 3 incorporated towns, Elizabeth, Kiowa, and Simla. And then we do have 3 unincorporated communities as well, Agate, Matheson, and Elbert. I will just add a little bit of context. I was at Simla Days yesterday with the comp plan consultants. We had a table and spoke with a bunch of residents. They have very different thoughts, concerns, and wishes down there. Really, really interesting. So it'll be fascinating to come back and report on all that and see how the survey results end up. Again, we're such a large county, right? It's about 50 miles across the county if you were to drive across. So it makes sense that there's a lot there and a lot of different needs, right? You all know this as well as anyone, but the map reminds us, right, that northwest, that very small northwest quadrant is where so much of the growth and the development and the population is. But again, we have a few of the major roadways highlighted on here as well, right? Highway 86 cutting across east to west. We have Highway 24 connecting down to the Springs, and of course, I-70 cutting across that northeast corner. So I do think that there'll be some really interesting land use discussions when we get there with the comp plan. So just a little bit of context, again, just a few reminders because we don't all drive the whole county all the time, right, or see everything that there is out there. So getting into a little bit more about, what you all do, mostly the applications that you see come before you are these, right? You see a lot of rezonings, right? Rezoning from ag, right, to allow for subdividing. PUD zoning, that is a rezoning as well, right? Creating a planned unit development. You see quite a few special use by reviews, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one. And then preliminary and final plats. Again, not saying that's everything, it's not, but that's what you see the most of. So our regulations, especially for new folks, I wanted to point out if you do see ECZR, that are the zoning regulations, and if you see it noted SR, those are the subdivision regulations, and then it just sort of breaks down the different things that are included in those. Our zoning regulations are where we have our zoning districts, the allowable land uses for various districts, and the development standards, right? That includes building height and setbacks and things like that. And then we do have our separate subdivision regulations, which is where the regulations for platting are included, lot standards, things for creating roadways, vacations, and those details. Again, I know you all know all this, but still just providing some basic information. Right, what is zoning? I do think it's important to start here because sometimes I get this question a lot, actually, about, just because you drive by and see a property operating in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that it's zoned that way. We talked about that 95% of the county is zoned ag. All property in the county is zoned. Right, if you all remember, not too long ago, we had a county-initiated zoning for a piece of property because it was de-annexed, and so it had to have zoning in the county. So all property in the county is zoned. Most of it is ag. The zoning on the property is what determines what's allowed there, the allowable land uses, as well as other development standards associated with that district, and we'll look at some of those. On the other hand, so those allowable land uses and those development standards are outlined in your regulations. When folks apply for a PUD, that is customized zoning, right? So they can outline, with approval, of course, they can outline specifically what can be done within the boundary of that PUD. PUDs are also often referred to, right, as master planned communities. They've existed for a number of decades. There's old ones, there are new PUDs. They are typically utilized to allow for development that is not allowed through straight zoning. And when we say straight zoning, we're meaning the zoning districts that are outlined in the regulations, ag, AR, R1, commercial, something like that. So a PUD can be residential, it can be non-residential, it can be a combination. Again, essentially, it can be anything that can be approved. It, of course, goes through you all and through the Board of County Commissioners. And different projects certainly have different needs. Related to zoning, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the land use table, or the use table. This is really where use is a primary concern of zoning. And this is just a little snip from a page in the regulations. And you'll see right across the top, we have the straight zoning districts. And then the land uses are on the left, broken down by various categories. And so if we were to take an example of a hotel, right? If a hotel developer came in and said, I'm looking at developing a hotel on this piece of property, right? What we would look at are, well, what is the zoning of that property, or what zoning would it need, right? So based on the land use table, you can see that in the A, right, the ag zoning district, a hotel is allowed with a special use by review. So it means it might be allowed, it could be in this zoning district, but it needs a little extra review because of potential impacts from that use. It's not allowed in any zoning category that has a blank cell. So it's not allowed in the residential districts. And then it is allowed by right, that's what the P indicates, in both the business and the commercial districts. So depending.
This is something that always
Yes, sir.
confused me. As I'm looking at this, right, we have a hotel or a motel, which is obviously non-residential, obviously business-facing, and we're still allowing for an agricultural zoning for that property. Do we actually change at some point this structure so it moves from ag to whatever the non-resident element is, business or commercial?
Oh, likely, absolutely. Many of these uses
But that's confusing. As you look at
probably
this
would
table.
need to be refined. And need to be refined, especially following the comp plan, right? So, yeah, let me clarify. I don't necessarily agree with this. Don't agree or disagree, but right, what we have to go by is what the regulations say now. My guess is that it's included that way because there is so much ag land in the county. Doesn't mean it's necessarily appropriate. And I was not even going to touch on EDZ tonight. I think we've talked about that with this group. So I was just going to skip over that. But I did want to talk just a little bit about use by right versus special use by review. Right, so if the P, if it was a business or a commercial zoning, there are some in the county, I'll be clear with you. There's not a lot of property that's already zoned business or commercial. Right, so most likely if someone were to come in and they actually did want to build a hotel in the county, they would either rezone the property to business or commercial or do a PUD to allow for perhaps a mixture of land uses.
I think the question I have is really around, is this a mechanism to give burgeoning business a tax break and allow them to pay a lower level of tax? Ag is going to be lower level than a business.
So my understanding, working with the assessor's office, is that their assessments are not based on zoning, they're based on the use. So it should be the same based on the use regardless of the underlying zoning.
So we have an opportunity to create some clarity
Absolutely.
around what this table actually looks like
Of course.
and fix some of those inconsistencies.
Absolutely.
I would suggest too that that is confusing because I feel like we've heard land use applications in the past where the tax burden was going to be more minimal if it was a use by special review on ag land rather than a change to commercial. So I would ask for clarity on that because I think that was communicated differently to us. In fact, I think it was the applicant themselves that was like, it would be too burdensome and too expensive. In addition to that, there's also the commercial safety requirements, right? So if you were to open a hotel or a business, but then not and do it by use by special review, then you would be getting away with not having to comply with a bunch of commercial safety standards and things like that, which I think in the end isn't helpful for our community. So I would love to talk more about, when a hotel or a motel would be appropriate for a use by special review if it's avoiding a lot of safety regulations for those types of businesses that the individuals would expect.
What do you mean by safety?
Yeah, I would add that I don't believe that the zoning would impact the building classification, which is
still
going to
have to
determine
follow-
building code.
The IBC.
So for example, I do recall that on past land use applications, there was discussions about bathrooms and there were discussions about food prep and those kinds of things that if they had to classify commercial, it was going to require them to have to comply with a bunch of other regulations that was going to be too costly.
So it wasn't the actual building of it, it was the other required.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
How often do these specific type of categories come to the Planning Commission for approval?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by that question. How often do the
Okay,
categories
so
come
a
forward?
shopping center. If
Uh-huh.
a shopping, somebody who's proposing to develop a shopping center, would that come to this Planning Commission?
Walmart.
Oh, good question. So it would come before you if it needed a rezoning. If it's allowed as a use by right, then it would only require a site development
So it's
plan.
simply the zoning aspect.
Yeah,
The zoning and the plating
specifics
would come before you.
not the specific use. So if a shopping center had a P with it, it's a permitted use by right. So then that shopping center would not come before us. But if it had an S next to it, then it would come before us.
That's right. Or if the property was currently zoned something that doesn't allow for it, it would come before you to be rezoned, and you would hear about it that way. So the
reason I
rezoning
say
and the
that,
plating.
In my short tenure, none of this has really, come to us as, that I recall.
You're right. The majority of what we see is residential development. The county has very little non-residential development. Absolutely. That's part of the reason as well. This is generating great discussion. I don't feel too bad about including this now. Whoops. But I do think that that's helpful. Again, not saying these are determined accurately, that they are what they are. We can certainly review them in the future for changes. The uses that are listed themselves need to be updated fairly regularly, right? Because literally new uses come to be over a period of time that simply weren't contemplated in the past. And so we do need to revisit these from time to time. But nonetheless, this is how sort of the use table works and as it relates to straight zoning. And then on the alternative side, what is a subdivision plat? There's a lot of questions about this as well. So when we're actually platting, that's when we are creating, drawing lot lines, easements, tracts, dedicating roadways perhaps. Lots are created by a tract. If you see a parcel that has a meets and bounds description, right, that's a parcel that hasn't been subdivided. And let's clarify that our subdivision regulations only apply to divisions of land that are less than 35 acres, right? If it's larger than that, the state exempts it from going through our regulations, and that's why you don't see those. obviously that means the final size. So, right, you see projects that are 1,000 acres, but they're breaking those down into smaller projects. Tracts are not buildable lots. I'm just bringing a few of these things up because I think that the terminology matters, and we're all sometimes guilty of using the words interchangeably when we really shouldn't, and so we should be a little bit careful of that. And a plat and a plot are different. So, but when you have a preliminary plat or a final plat come before you, it's drawing the lines on the paper that is a legal document. They're typically, they're very technical in nature, right? And the final plat is in conformance with the preliminary plat. We do have a two-step process here in Elbert County. There are sometimes for very small projects where it might make sense to combine those or waive the preliminary plat, but typically we do see both of those. Part of the reason for both of them is, again, because of the technicality and the level of engineering that's required. It is very expensive to get that level of detail and prepare those. I see a question, yes? Ma'am.
Yeah, I have a clarifying question for you. So when you, for example, have a PUD where they have the proposal for kind of how they want to structure the community, but nothing is nothing's concrete yet. When does it become concrete? Does it become concrete in the preliminary? When the preliminary plat is before the Planning Commission? Is that when what they've proposed is now going to be what we're discussing? Because, for example, at that first, right, at the rezone to the PUD, you're not really, voting on whether or not you agree with that criteria or not. It's more about what the project is and if that's compliant with the criteria. Mm-hmm. So at what point are you actually giving feedback on what they have, proposed to be their design standards?
So PUDs are unique, right? They're fun. They can do interesting things, but they are a challenge to deal with. So at the time of reviewing the PUD proposal, right, zoning to PUD, that's when we need to review everything that's included, right? What their minimum lot size is. So it's not drawing the lots, but it is setting the standards for what type of lots can potentially be in different areas. Again, it's a little bit hard to have these hypotheticals because a PUD can be a single lot or it can be 1,000 acres, and they obviously function differently. But if we say we have, 100 acres, most times the PUD will have areas, and it's going to say, this area will be commercial, and then this area is going to be this density of residential, and this area may be a little bit different density of residential. So the PUD itself would outline what is allowed in those areas and the standards for that. So it's not drawing the lot lines, but it is putting together the standards that will apply. There is flexibility, and I know sometimes we try to caution you all on that a little bit, right? Because they can vary within the parameters that they've set. And so sometimes those are very narrow and sometimes those are much more broad. And that can be the hard part, right, for sure. But when we get to preliminary plat, that's where it's much more specific in terms of location of roadways, location of either tracks or super blocks, or all the way down to lots. And so often with the PUD, you will see that where you'll see sort of an intermediate, that's my word, that's not a technical, right? But you'll see maybe an infrastructure plat where they are dedicating the roadways and creating super blocks. That they will be further subdivided, but they're creating those as a basis, right? And so then again, you get more specific again on that. On that next final plat, when they are replatting, one of those super blocks, that's when you'll actually get the lots that meet those requirements for, right, the minimum lot size or whatever.
So just for an example, because this has come up in recent conversations, but if it was a development that seemed to us would be an appropriate one to have a sidewalk. So it sounds like you're saying if that was something that the county wanted to see included, they should do that discussion and require it during a rezone.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
100%.
thanks.
Okay.
Hey, Jennifer?
Yes, sir.
Do our subdivision regulations, they don't require any phase ones or environmentals for residential development, do they?
I don't believe so off the top of my head, but I'm not.
Steering
I have
committee?
not committed them all to memory.
An idea for the steering committee?
So moving on, this, again, another disclaimer, I created a very simplified version of sort of a flow chart of the process. It's not intended to be all-inclusive, but it does give us some talking points on the overall process. And I did want to point out that the role of staff in this overall process, staff helps facilitate the process, right? Facilitate the applicant moving through the process. We try, obviously, we do a review and things like that, but I do think it's important to clarify that staff is neutral, and so we try to work with applicants to get it as close to approvable as we believe it can be. We'll also work with folks that are opposed and have questions. We certainly work with them as well. And so staff does try to play a very neutral role. It is a challenging place to be sometimes. But I just wanted to clarify that as we talk about the overall process.
Do
So-
you find that that's hard for staff to maintain that neutrality?
So yes and no. I will say I think staff tries to use their professional judgment to help projects move forward and try to give the best information to applicants, understanding, right, the time and money and effort and things like that that are involved. I will say staff is always extremely clear upfront about who the decision makers are, and we try to provide feedback on that as well. And that's appointed and elected officials, and we're clear about, this is what we're hearing. There's, been concern noted about these types of things, and so we can help steer people in a direction. But at the end of the day, our goal is to ensure that they have a fair hearing and that they go through the process. But what's decided is not up to us.
Yeah, you guys are Sherpas as opposed to decision makers in this process.
Yes, sir.
The open question becomes, as you're looking at this, I know that developers, developer communities, and folks, well, let me ask the question a different way, right? So you guys asked the Planning Commission to sign a code of conduct. It's something that all staff has to sign now, correct?
Staff has their own code of conduct and an employee handbook.
But it's separate and distinct. Does it follow the same pattern that we were asked to sign, or is it?
I have not compared the two documents. I think they generally are similar. And just to clarify, that did not come from staff, that came from the board,
Well, it came from the lawyer.
at the board's direction.
Yes. So let's be clear, there was enough legalese in there to make it an interesting conversation. But,
Sure.
so the question becomes, how close is it to y'all's, and how do you maintain that neutrality? Because I know that they're doing things like, okay, so let me buy you lunch, let's talk this over lunch, those kind of things. And there's restrictions around what's acceptable in that process.
Of course. Of course, yes, sir.
Okay.
Hey, here's what, well, I guess I'm a bit confused. So you talked about the neutrality. But what I see when the applications get to the Planning Commission, staff is making recommendations. So, recommend to approve, and going through the criteria, providing that information, it, fits this in the comprehensive plan, or it fits that. And the way that comes across to me is staff is taking a position on these applications. And, one of the things that I saw recently was when Independence came up with filing 5.
We shouldn't talk about specific projects.
Okay,
but
we
if
had
could
a-
talk hypothetically.
Okay, hypothetically, there was an application, and the attorney for the applicant went through the criteria of approval, and that staff had approved, and I think those were the words they used, staff said that this is in
Hypothetically.
compliance, hypothetically. So, and that hypothetically being the case, I'm struggling with how does that become neutrality, and especially when, you know, we get into that one criteria that it is in alignment with the comprehensive plan, for example. And I see the same comprehensive plan being pointed out generally in almost every application, rather than digging deeper into it and seeing things that maybe it's not in compliance with. So I don't know if you can explain that more, but
Sure.
I just don't see the neutrality there that I think you see.
Sure, absolutely. So I will say that staff reports do not have a staff recommendation at this time. That has come out per you all's recommendation. They are reviewed. You're disagreeing with that?
Yeah, they have changed that piece, so it is, they no longer say, we recommend this. It's a review statement, and we should be, you know, when the lawyer comes in and hypothetically says, you know, we know this aligns to the comprehensive plan, it meets all of these criteria, we're still the judge. And we get to say, no, really, it doesn't, and here's why.
And so there's a review that says it could, right, basically it's saying it could be found, right, that this is met and this is met and this is met and this is met, blah, blah, blah. Certainly, you all are welcome to disagree with that and change that. The reason that it is like that is because findings are necessary. And so hearings, we can do it if you all would like, but hearings would be quite slow, right, if you all as a body and then the board as a body were writing findings for every criteria at every hearing. And so a lot of those that we see are similar, right? There are types of applications we see often, right? 40-acre lot splits and things like that. And so yes, some of the same language, right, in the comprehensive plan is referred to in terms of goals, mostly goals, some policies. You're right, the comprehensive plan is a long document, and so could you find a sentence that does not support any project or does support any project? Probably so. We try to focus on the goals, you know, in the categories that seem to be relevant to the application. Is there different opinions on that? Absolutely.
And I think this is definitely a topic worth, you know, discussing further, not necessarily in this venue, but I think it would be really helpful for us to get a little bit more in the mud on that. And again, not today, because I think you and I have an honest disagreement about how we see those things happening. And I will just say one more thing, since we're somewhat on the topic. Hypothetically, in a hypothetical recent hearing, one of the land use applications came before the BOCC, and the BOCC asked about why the Planning Commission voted the way they did. And staff they didn't know, and there were referrals to draft meeting minutes. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I found that concerning, because we all do spend a lot of time on these things and deliberating and discussing. And when it gets in front of the BOCC, if our recommendations aren't clearly put forward as part of that decision-making process, I think that shortchanges everybody and kind of negates our role in the process.
Sure, absolutely. So I guess two points to that is the planning commission makes a recommendation, right? The recommendation is the recommendation, whether that vote is, right, 9-0 or 4-5 or whatever. And so we could certainly explain that. I welcome your ideas, and I've chatted with Commissioner Hunt a little bit about this, about how to convey the opposing vote, whether that's for or against, doesn't matter, right? The minority vote, how to convey that without necessarily providing a transcript, right? Or remembering exactly what folks say. And so, but again, I think we
I think that's the
are
point, though. 'cause
open
We've
to-
been very clear here recently. It does not align with this goal, this
Absolutely.
branch of the,
Yep.
ECZR or the SR. And I think those are germane to the topic that the Board of County Commissioners should be hearing. This is why they didn't agree.
Absolutely.
These things fall out of line, or
Yep.
these things didn't fall out of line. And, that's why they voted the way they voted.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That would be a really clear thing if we carried that format forward. It's as simple as putting
Sure.
it into a table.
Absolutely. And if it's as part of the vote, right, that it typically is included in the meeting minutes directly like that. I would just add, sometimes there's lengthy discussion ahead of time, right, which is not necessarily conveyed in the same way. But again, I welcome your feedback on how we do a better job of conveying both sides of the vote.
Well, and maybe just for clarification, maybe my idea of a recommendation is different. My idea, and I'll just say my idea of a recommendation is, as Kevin said, if I voted no, here is why. That is my recommendation, not just a vote itself. So I guess the question is, do you consider a recommendation to be, this is how it was voted, as opposed to the additional information as to why the votes were the way they were?
So
Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I guess I would clarify that I'm not the county attorney, and I'm not pretending to be, but I have worked with a number of municipal attorneys and county attorneys over the years, and what I have always been taught and always understood is that there are not 9 recommendations from the Planning Commission. There is 1 recommendation from the Planning Commission. So that's the recommendation. And then what I am agreeing to, or agreeing with you, is that we can absolutely better reflect what that opposing reasoning for the opposing votes are. Does that make sense? I don't know if you all agree or disagree, but I think that is,
I think we've come to an impasse on this, and I think we've got a couple of different ideas that we can bring forward and have conversations about when we change the rules in the next session. So
Sure.
happy to do that. But I think we're taking you pretty far afield of your training presentation.
Chair, if you could just give me a moment to
I
comment.
have one question, though, just point of clarification, because I don't always hear everything. So as I understand it, you are no longer recommending approval.
so the staff report does not say, so I think both of those are a no. So it does not say staff recommends approval. And it also, if there are criteria that staff is concerned about, it highlights that as well. So,
And so I just had 2 points I want to make. One is on the one that Dan's speaking to. I do think you're accurate in saying that you're not saying staff recommends you should vote the following way. However, your staff reports do say things like, this criteria has been met, or the evidence is consistent with this criteria, which would lead one to suggest that staff has decided this criteria is good to go, and therefore we disagree with any findings that the criteria has not been met.
So it can be found that it can be met. Again, if you all disagree, you're welcome to change that one as we move forward. I mean, we can change the language to it could be found that, ...
I guess my point is just that, yes, you might not be explicitly saying staff recommends such and such, but when you say it meets the following criteria, you are implicitly saying that you recommend that the project moves forward. That was one point. The other point I had to make had to do with, you were saying on the topic of explaining why the PC votes the way it does to the BOCC, you said, you were taught, well, there's only one recommendation from the PC. I have seen in past applications where the majority of the Planning Commission voted to change the recommendation to the BOCC, and when that happened, there really wasn't an explanation provided to the BOCC as to why the Planning Commission voted the way that they did. And so in that case, to me, that's a glaring example of where that should have been clear to the BOCC. I mean, I think you still had minority people who voted against that one, but a majority of the group did vote to slightly change the recommendation to the BOCC. But when the BOCC asked why, the explanation by staff was, I can't really remember, and so I think in that instance especially, it would be important, not only that the minority is represented, but also the majority that was different than what the staff recommended.
Yeah. Like I said, open to suggestions. There's always room for improvement. I don't disagree with that at all. We are happy to leave things as open as you would like. I would be concerned about having no staff report and no information, right? I don't think that would necessarily benefit you all either. But again, we can explore whatever you all find to be the most helpful. So we can move on. Okay. Again, this is a super simplified version of the process, but I think it's worth chatting through. So our first two boxes are pre-application meeting. That's a meeting with applicants and with staff. That staff typically includes someone from planning, someone from public works, someone from the assessor's office, someone from fire. There are a number of other people invited. That's typically who attends those pre-application meetings. Though those are designed to provide early information to applicants about what processes they need to go through, what the timeframes look like. Again, it's pretty basic information. It is a required step. The next required step is, again, this is in most applications, not everything, a community meeting. And I want to talk a little bit about community meetings, and I want to point out that the community meeting, the required community meeting, comes before an application has been filed. So it is before the formal application, and the regulations require it to be that way. So I do think that that's important to point out. I know that staff attends community meetings. We don't run those, but we do attend and listen. Sometimes we answer basic questions. A lot of times the public thinks that we're there supporting a project, or this project has already been decided, or they're coming to vote against it. Actually, I have another. Let's get to community meetings in just a second. I do have a slide on that. But I did want to point out that both the pre-app and the community meeting are before an application has even come in. So it is very early on. And then let's talk about the community meetings a little bit. Again, it's extremely early in the process. I explain community meetings both to the public and to applicants as information sharing, right? It's an opportunity for applicants to share their ideas, their vision, their information with the community, with the property owners and the residents in that area. And it is an opportunity for those members of the public to share their feedback with the applicants. The reason it's early in the process is so that revisions could be made while it's still early, right? Before things are drawn up and submitted and done and things like that. So it is early in the process. There aren't any decisions that are made at community meetings. It is, yes, sir.
How much detail is required for the community meeting? And is there so when you're doing the pre-application meeting, is there like a matrix or a process that you go through that's very specific in terms of what is required to get to the community?
Yes, so there are certain things that are required, but certainly they do vary with applications, right? The level of detail. And so for some projects, right, it's a little bit more general in nature because they're exploring, right? If this makes sense, if this is a possibility, what the processes would be. But there are requirements to move forward with that. There are requirements for the community meeting as well.
Just real quick, a lot of it is outlined in the zoning regulations, what the requirements are, minutes, feedback, sign-in sheets. So there are documented parameters that, can be wiggly, but it is in there.
Yep.
In the big binder, yes.
Yeah, it is a required step. The caution I have for you all with putting too much, I guess, emphasis on the feedback from the community meeting is often the submittal is different than what was presented at the community meeting. And so it's important, that's why I wanted to highlight, right, that it is before the submittal comes in, and that's intended for them to be able to make adjustments. So some people make none, some people make lots of adjustments, and actually some projects don't ever move forward after the community meeting, right? Actually, a lot of those. Same with the pre-app meetings. I actually brought some numbers for you all, just for discussion. And this is sort of currently, right, as of September, the number of projects that have gone through either have held or have scheduled a pre-app only, but not gone any further, are 63, right? So we have 63 projects that have had a pre-app or it's scheduled, but haven't done anything else. We have 17, these are all approximates, but about 17 that have done a pre-app and a community meeting, and we don't know if anything will happen after that. So they may go ahead and submit, or they may not. And I know, Commissioner, you and I talked about this a little bit. There are a lot of projects that you all won't ever see because of, right, the feedback either at the pre-app and or at the community meeting, and they decide, we're not going to move forward with this for whatever reason, right? It's too expensive. It's too much of an uphill battle. There's maybe another site or another project or something like that. So there are a lot of those that do happen. And so I just want to remind you all that there are a lot of things going on out there that don't necessarily make it all the way to you. I also want to talk about that a community meeting is not a public hearing. I know you all know that. However, again, the wording matters on that, and it's not a public hearing. It's so much not a public hearing that we've changed the signs, and so I want to show you the signs real quick. Well, you can see over here the new white signs. We've always had yellow signs, right? We still have yellow signs for the public hearing and administrative decision, but we have one going up. We're using the last yellow sign this week. Then we're going to be changing to white signs for the community meetings, and we'll work with Wendy and others to help get that out there. But so the idea is that if you see a sign, right, if the public sees a sign and they can kind of quickly identify by color, oh, that's just a community meeting, still important, right, but decisions aren't being made. If I live near there, I may want to attend. I could go learn some information. I could provide feedback, but it's not a public hearing, and it's not decision-making. And so that's one small little tweak that we're doing to try to help provide that distinction for folks, because we do have people call often, what's that public hearing, or when's that public hearing, or, things like that, and we're like, what there's no public hearing up there. So again, those words matters. Community meeting, early in the process, no decisions are being made, but it is an important exchange of information. We really emphasize to applicants how important that is because I will be very honest with you all, a lot of times people don't realize the potential pushback that they may receive. And so that helps staff let people know, I think you'll be interested in the feedback you get at that community meeting. And sometimes it goes both ways, right? Sometimes, we don't know and nobody attends the public meeting and then people, that provides information as well. So community meetings are always valuable, whether there's nobody there or whether there's 3 or 4 people there, or we've all been to ones that have 70 or 100 people there. Those are very informative for applicants. And hopefully, and for the residents, right? Because they're hearing what's being proposed. Because it's important for them to hear from applicants, not necessarily, right, from a rumor mill or social media or whatever, because oftentimes I hear those as well, and they're simply not accurate. So it's a helpful exchange of information. But please do remember that often what was initially shown may change dramatically, especially by the time it gets to you all. Okay, that's enough about community meetings. So now the next stage after community meetings, they decide, okay, we're going to go ahead and make a formal application and completeness review. We've talked a lot about this. We do not need to get into all of that. I highlight this piece just as this is fairly quick. This is where we collect the application fee. This is where they actually send everything in, and all of that is checked to, do we have the information needed to begin the next steps of the process? The next steps of the process are review and referral. So at that time, we have a complete application fees have been paid, the review process begins. That means reviewed by CDS staff as well as everyone that has sent out a referral. And so that varies by project, but typically, right, it's the applicable fire district, it's public works, it's the sheriff's office, it's all of these different folks, right, utility providers, if they have a water district or something like that. So the review and the referral process is what takes by far the most time in a project. And you see those arrows going back and forth because depending on how that goes, that sometimes cycles around multiple times. So the referral process is intended to get projects before the subject matter experts, right? Whether that's someone at the state, whether that is, again, the applicable fire district, whether that's, right, our engineers reviewing engineering matters. And there's different types of comments that are provided as a part of those referrals, right? Some comments are informational, please be aware of these standards or this, sometimes it's requests or recommendations, and sometimes they're actual requirements, right? This does not meet fire code, this needs to be adjusted, blah, 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 things like that. So depending on what those comments are, they often require a resubmittal of the application. For more simple applications, that's probably 2 submittals. For a big PUD project, that's 4 or more is not unusual because there's so much involved and so much being reviewed in that. The large plats as well because there's so much engineering. Last step of the process, you all know, is the public hearings for things that come before you. Again, the public hearing versus the community meeting, it is a quasi-judicial hearing. There is an opportunity for the public to comment, and then that is where, right, recommendations and decisions are made. Questions about the process? Again, I know it's extremely high level, but hopefully it helps provide a little bit of talk. The last thing for tonight is I wanted to talk about future speakers and some of the requested training that I've heard. I have reached out to a land use attorney that I know that I've worked with in other times. I mean, I don't know him personally. I've worked with him professionally. Gerald Dahl, he is a very well-respected land use attorney in the state, and Our county attorney has okayed him to come and speak to you all. I do have that scheduled for October 7th right now. And I'm happy to share his bio with you all, but he has worked for municipalities and counties throughout the state for many years and is very knowledgeable and often speaks on behalf of DOLA and on land use or on ethics also. And so, again, he's very well-respected, very likable. I think you all will get a lot from him. And so I am proposing to bring him in to chat with you all on the 7th. Is that right? Yes, the 7th. October is a special month where Planning Commission and BOCC are back-to-back both weeks. How exciting. Others, I've talked with our local rep at DOLA. They are also more than willing to come down and chat about Planning Commission roles, all sorts of things from sort of a state perspective. We have folks at USGS who are more than willing, they're actually a little harder to schedule, but who are willing to come chat about water, if you all are interested in that. I wanted to hear from you all what else you think would be interesting. I thought, and I have not asked them, so please don't tell them that I have committed them, because I haven't. Perhaps someone from Public Works and Engineering to talk about what they're reviewing, why they're making certain comments or recommendations, why they're not, things like that, just to give you all a little bit more perspective about those reviews. I know traffic comes up a lot, right? That's something we talk about often, so perhaps that could be helpful. Same maybe with someone from one of our fire districts. We obviously have several fire districts. If that would be helpful so that you all know or can hear
You
from
could
them.
almost do those together because they're going to follow the same pattern, right? They're talking about referrals. What are the things you consider? Okay, so now engineering, what do you consider? Fire, how do you make the calculation for what the coverage is and the number of resources you need for this this area, this growth spurt? Those are all good questions that probably could iterate through all three of those.
Sure.
I'd love to see them do it all at once.
Feel it? Maybe. So I'm certainly open to other ideas. Like I said, I know that there's been a lot of talk about requests for, I don't know if I like to call it training or a workshop, a discussion, right, with folks. And so, you all have already heard from the county attorney and chatted about, quasi-judicial hearings and all of that. So again, this is my sort of proposal to you all, but I welcome your feedback on what you think would be helpful.
Hit my green button first. I think what would be very, very helpful is to have DOLA come in and talk to us about the comprehensive plan, so that by the time it gets to us, since in some jurisdictions, the planning commissions are the ones that make it, and it will help us to understand what we're looking at, what kind of decisions we can make, impacts. I think that would be extremely helpful.
As long as they stay out of our way when we make the decisions, absolutely. Happy to hear it.
I had a question just with regard to referrals when we were kind of skipping over them quickly, but I was glad to see them. I think it would be great to have some of the referral agencies in. I wonder too, because as I think back to, engagement from referral agencies in the past, sometimes they're very involved and engaged in giving feedback, and sometimes they're not at all, even though this is definitely going to impact them. So I'm just wondering on the question of referrals, to kind of your overview in the first place, is there some type of requirement that the county has on the referral agencies about giving feedback? So it seemed to me that even a non-response is not helpful to the community or to the county when it comes to, people actually making decisions that are going to impact that entity.
So, and this is the challenge, right, is to engage experts when we need them to provide feedback. And a lot of our agencies are great, right, and really helpful. There is language in the regulations, and I know you all have discussed it and don't really care for it. There is regulations in there that basically says, no response in a referral assumes that you have no concern or no objection. I'm not looking at the exact language.
Perhaps we need to have another rules and regs
Right.
working group there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
Because there's a lot of stuff that, we've commented on that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
And then my
Absolutely.
other question, and it also relates to the referral agencies, but I guess wanted to get your perspective on it. But as we're talking about redoing the comp plan and kind of how that is setting a new vision and a new tone for where the county is aspiring to go, how does that potentially impact the structure by which referral agencies are reviewing these requests, these land use applications? In years past, I think there's been more of a looser vision of, just how far the county wants to go. And so people are following, the BOCC in development and growth, and, it's happening at a quick pace. But when there's a comp plan that comes in and kind of sets a different type of tone, does that impact these referral agencies? Are they actually referring to the comp plan to see, okay, we're taking like a slight change in direction with regard to how we're developing the county, and that means maybe we also have to change some of how we look at our standards internally to make sure we're in line with what the county is doing? Is there any interplay there with how they're engaging?
So I think yes and no. I think the comp plan is not regulatory, right? And so it is not regulations that have to be met. It is a guiding document. And there's a bug attacking me. And so for county departments, does that help guide their direction? Certainly. We also have, right, a lot of our referral agencies are not county departments, right? They're partners, right? There are outside fire districts or school districts or things like that. And so do they refer to the comp plan? I doubt it, right? They are likely and referring to their own regulations, right? What do they need? Their own direction, their own guiding documents. So could it help provide direction? In a general sense, will it provide direction that tells us we need to update our regulations? I expect so. But maybe I'm not sure exactly what your hypothetical is for who would get direction from the comp plan in terms of a land use application review. But maybe I'm being too literal about what you
Yeah, no, that's helpful, I think. And you're right, there's institutions that exist outside of the county. I was thinking in particular the ones that would, be most affected by it, like fire or public works, wanting to make sure that they are paying just as close of attention to what the comp plan, the vision of the comp plan is laying out. But I'll give you one really concrete example that I was looking at recently, and this is actually in the comp plan, and it relates to public land dedications, which will impact a lot of other entities potentially outside of the county itself. And I'm thinking in particular, for example, a school district. And it says the county should, and this is laid out in, so you have the principle and then the goals and then the policies. So the smallest version of it where they say the county should require the public land dedications include adequate access to water, sewer, and other utilities to serve the intended use. So anyway, the point is that where there is specific direction, even to entities that are outside of traditional, county purview, that there is impact to those agencies, those referral agencies, and that it's helpful to have them on track with the county in terms of what the vision is and where we're going, and then how it falls out into policies.
Of course. Yeah, it's always helpful information is powerful, right? It's always helpful for them to know the direction the county's going. It's helpful for us to know the direction that they're going, right, that their leaders have provided. But really, I think when it's most effective is when we take that direction from the comp plan and whether it's the county or another agency, then translate that into actual regulations, right? That's what can be most effective. That's what people can be really held to. But absolutely. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you. the referral agency thing, the way it's working now, that's something I've had an issue with myself, because like they said, there are things that are large projects that affect, and we don't hear back.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, do we as a county actually reach out to the decision makers at the school districts, at the fire, with the police, to make sure they understand the importance, what they can and can't do with that? Because I could tell you, I met with somebody in one organization that was a decision maker, and he thought it was basically, the notice was, you have to deal with it. It's not, I can object and have issues with this proposal. So I'm just wondering what information and training do we give to them to make sure that we get good responses back that are fruitful for our group?
Sure, great question. So a couple things on that. So we have a sort of dedicated person or email, right, at each agency or entity, right, that we send referrals to, right, and they update those with us regularly. And so that's kind of where referrals go, and that's, our dedicated contact for different projects. And I will say staff does, reach back out on things and try to get comments. We can't write them for them. We can't force people to respond, but actually more along the lines of what you were saying, something I have been thinking about that I want to do is have basically a review summit, right? Sort of a big meeting, literally put everybody in the same room and talk exactly about what you're talking about explaining the role, the process, having some type of maybe direction from the board or something like that, right? Reiterating the importance and just for us to remind them. I don't know if that's ever been done in the past, either formally or informally, but I think it is a good time to explore that again and just reiterate to people again how much their comments are not only welcomed and encouraged, but desperately wanted. Again, I have no idea if that's how it was, in the past or not, or again, so much change has happened, not only at the county, but with other agencies as well. I think that would be helpful to have those conversations again, even all the way back to pre-apps as well, about, again, just re-engaging with folks, answering questions, explaining the importance, because I do think that we need to hear from those subject matter experts, but we can ask and ask and ask, and at some point that is where we're limited on a specific project.
Yeah, sure. And I guess what I would also suggest is if the email address changes to somebody different, that we have a discussion with that new person, similar to what you're saying,
Yes.
So that the communication and the knowledge, transfers on, because it is a very valuable part of the process that we hear what their concerns are.
Absolutely. But just like at the county, right, when we get referrals, what's that?
Just telling me to move my mic closer
okay.
because I'm not
Okay.
loud enough.
Yeah.
All right.
So we can certainly do that. Like I said, I would love to do that. I think that could be really beneficial. The other side of it, though, would be just like with the county. When we get referrals, right, they come to staff to be reviewed and provide comments, whoever the appropriate staff person is. They don't necessarily go to, right, the board. And so there will always be a little bit of probably a disconnect between, right, decision makers who are speaking and right, the staff people who are doing the reviews. But I think it could be valuable if you all agree to, sort of re-engage and have those conversations again, sort of with the new direction that has been provided by you all and by the board, and talking about the importance of the referral process, the review process, right, that we do value their comments. Right, we've all heard that on any given thing, right? If people don't feel valued, right, then they're not going to respond again. And so I think if we can re-engage that even more, we have done a little bit in terms of, some emails and some explanations and things like that, but I'd really like to have a big in-person meeting and just get everyone in the same room and really talk about it and let, a board member or two discuss that with them as well, just to reiterate the importance.
That would be a lot of fun, I think, actually. So, but Just want to say thank you for this session tonight. It's been very good, very
I've got a
helpful.
couple of more questions, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Okay. It's about the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So if these are fair questions. So what is the dynamics as we approach the comprehensive plan now? When we consider the fact that we have already approved enough building sites to double the population of Elbert County. Triple. So how does that affect the dynamics
Pardon me,
of the
Commissioner.
comprehensive plan?
Pardon me, Commissioner. If you really could keep your microphone a little bit closer, we can't hear you. Thank you.
Closer.
You keep moving it around on me. Okay.
Actually, if you put it over here on this side and lean into it a little bit, I think they'll hear you better.
And if you put it over there, I'll
Well,
stop
Ken's
moving it.
was like way over there, and nobody gave him a hard time.
You're very soft-spoken,
How'd you get away
sir.
with that?
Wendy keeps looking at me, and she's gonna beat me
Okay,
up.
so getting back to my question, how does that affect the dynamics of the comprehensive plan? And I'm guessing a lot of times when you are approaching a comprehensive plan, you're looking at growth as usual, but given the fact that we are tripling, potentially, how does that affect the conversations?
So at your next meeting, I would be happy to bring actual numbers about zoned property versus platted property, right? We kind of talked a little bit about that tonight, because I know that those numbers get thrown out a lot. Those numbers have been worked and provided for various other conversations. I don't have them with me tonight, but the number of maximum units that have been zoned is a very different number than the number of lots that have been platted. So I do think that that's an important distinction that we need to make.
But to answer your question more directly, we do take it into consideration. We do have the push and pull of developers and real estate agents in that comprehensive plan committee, steering committee. And so we hear what they have to say, but we're also, I think, we're all kind of putting the point out there that, dude, we've got a whole lot of these already in flight, in plan. I'm more interested in figuring out, what do we do to preserve the character of the county than how do I add another 15,000 units and line your pockets when I could be focusing on the effect that we're having on the character of the county. Are we going to become like Denver, where Denver has its own nucleus of folk that run it and drive the community, but not everybody agrees. And so, I mean, the whole state is like that. It hinges on what Denver says or what Boulder says, and rarely and occasionally what Colorado Springs says, but only rarely.
And we're in the great position that it has to come through us ultimately.
Yes.
And I agree with what Diane suggested. As this process continues, bringing updates to us and having conversations, informative conversations with us would be beneficial. My second question, Jennifer, I guess it pertains to you and to staff and your involvement in the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
What is your role? And as an example, in your role as planning manager and staff and the people that you're working with, I'm assuming, there are gray areas out there that you're dealing with all the time. Now, some of them are meant to be, and maybe they should be, but others could be tightened up a little bit. Is that something that you try and bring to conversational points with the comprehensive plan? So I guess the two questions: what is your role, and when it comes to areas that kind of challenge you and your staff. How can this comprehensive plan make your lives easier?
Sure, yeah, thank you for those questions. So I basically serve as the liaison, right, between the county and the consultant that has been hired. So, I'll reiterate that the intent, the full intent behind the comp plan is for it to be community driven, right, based on feedback from the community. It's early. I expressed some of the same concern that I heard Commissioner Hunt say about, well, why are we trying to do, right, vision and things like that if we don't have the survey results back? And the answer to that is people are eager to get this going and get this done. Right, things can take a very long time, and so there is a desire to make progress, but it is all under the understanding that everything will be checked, confirmed, and further driven and explored based on community feedback. So that takes a variety of avenues, right, sort of how we're getting that feedback. The steering committee is certainly a large part of that, and the intent with them, right, is that they were sort of a cross-section of the community, meaning right, newer residents, long-term multi-generational residents, different professional backgrounds, different interests, and things like that. So the steering committee is really helping lead that project. I'm also sort of the liaison with them. But do I provide some questions or feedback or suggestions to the consultants about, things we think we need to touch on this, we think that this would be really helpful? Of course, because I at least hope that I know, some more about the county and about you all and the board direction and things like that. So I certainly try to help bridge any gaps that exist there. Is it a perfect science? It's not, right? It's more of an art than a science, but we're certainly trying to make sure that we are covering all of those bases, so to speak. Now, does the comp plan answer any questions or fix any, sort of holes or gray areas for us? Not necessarily, because it's not regulatory, but what I think is important for us to sort of talk about again is that this comp plan, unlike our existing comp plan, will include a future land use map. And that kind of also goes back to your previous question about, right, how do we deal with the fact that certain things have been entitled, are likely to move forward and things like that. And that future land use map, I really think is going to be helpful for the county because it's going to help tailor, right, where development is most appropriate and what types of development are most appropriate. Yes, ma'am.
In your opinion, if land has been entitled for a particular use via rezone, does that mean that that's going to pretty heavily influence the map that you're talking about that is going to show, okay, this type of land use is permitted here. Now that means the surrounding area is likely going to be more likely to be rezoned similar type of zoning.
So we're certainly not that far yet, just for clarification, as far as, getting into the map details. But
well, I do know that we're going to start talking about the map at our next meeting in September.
So about the process and about land
Yes.
use, but not about a map. So
Right.
that's going to be quite a bit further out. So
Sure, but my
we're talking
question
about
is
categories.
specifically about where land has already been entitled
Yes.
to a particular zoning use. Is that going to impact maps? Does it usually impact your land use maps?
I think it needs to be taken into consideration, just so that we're, right, again, it's sort of painting the full picture.
Well, the reason why I ask is because you were making a distinction between entitled versus, platted, or like zoned versus platted. But in a lot of these places where there are applications that have been zoned for a particular use but not yet platted, are they going to have the same type of influence because it's already entitled?
And in some places they might, and in some places they might not. So I think it's really going to depend on a case-by-case basis, right? There's certainly some areas that have been entitled that I would expect the future land use to probably be somewhat in line with that. Right, and future land use is not zoning, and it's not even intended to be lot specific, right? So it's, and there's different ways to do this. I have no idea which way this one will go, but in general, so it could go either way. Again, I think it should at least be thought about, and then if you all, right, decide that this area really does not need to go further that way, you can certainly adjust the map accordingly to that. I do think it'll be important, though, that we consider everything when we're looking at it, right? Because, again, existing or what may come there, I want you all to have that in mind when you're thinking about how we want to further develop those areas in the future, right? And there's some that are much easier and some that are much harder based on their proximity to other things, right, for sure. But a lot of that will have to work out when we get there and with you all's direction about how specific you want it to be. You know, some of the residential categories over in this central part will probably be some of the hardest. You know, some of the, let's talk about the I-70 and Highway 86 interchange. That'll be a super interesting discussion, right, that we all haven't really had the opportunity to have yet. And I think that discussion will go in a different way than some of the residential discussions. But to be determined, we're just not quite there yet. But I will want you all to have all of the maps so you at least have all of the information that you're considering, and then you all can decide, you all both meaning the steering committee, the public, and the planning commission, ultimately, what makes sense on that map for future rezonings, right? Because in the future, some of that in conformance with the comp plan becomes a lot easier because the map gives you a really good starting point, right?
Can I change what you're saying a little bit? I think we have a starting point and that we have a green field for how we address the map, the zones, the areas that we're considering. And so I would keep a very open mind about these things and you know, we've got a bunch of bright people, both in the steering committee and the planning commission, that we can actually make a difference on what that map looks like and how it ends up. And so,
Absolutely.
again, those are questions that we don't know the answer to.
It'll be really exciting.
But it's fun to think about.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Jennifer, thank you so much.
I hope this was somewhat helpful. I appreciate the conversation. I want to just be sure and extend, please send me, you know, if you all have ideas or topics you want to chat about at future meetings. We can certainly chat more about, you know, contents of staff reports and things like that. So we're open to those ideas. I think I've tried to tell you all of that. Change sometimes is slow, especially sustainable, effective change, but we want to hear from you all and make adjustments as necessary. And I'm always open to trying something, and if we try it and we're like, yeah, that didn't quite work, we can always adjust it and try it again. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to do, and so we want to continue that. So I welcome you all's feedback on those things.
Fantastic. Thank you again very much. If there are no other questions, I think we're at the end. Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn? Okay, let's just hang out here some more.
It's way too early. It's not even 10.
Wake up, guys.
All right, I move that we adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We're out of here.